morning, everyone. Begin the program. At this point, I'd like to welcome you all to the second day of our lecture series entitled Ina, Power and Intimacy, a special lecture series and exhibition organized by the Archdiocese of Caceres in cooperation with the Ateneo de Naga University Press and the National Book Development Board. To begin our program today, I'd like to invite you to a prayer. We all rise. The prayer is a biblical translation of the Memorare, Rumduma. I'd like to invite you to recite it with me. Sa ngalan ni Ama, Aki, patin Espiritu Santo. Amen. Rumduma, o mabuoton na Birhen Maria, na mayo pa nin sisay na sa imo nakiulay, nin pagbantay asin pagantabay, nagpasurog, nagpatabang, nakimaherak kan sa imong pag-arang, an sa imong pinabayaan. Kaya dara, susubuot akong minadalagan, o birhen kan mga birhen, ina kong totoo, sa imo minarani ako, sa atubang mo minatindog ako, makasaalanon asin mamundoon. Ining sakong mga kahagadan, kundi sa imong pagkamahuyo, danguga asin simbagaman ako. Amen. Sa ngalan ni Ama, Aki, patin Espiritu Santo. Amen. Please take your seat. The prayer is a biblical translation of the Memorare by His Grace Rex Andrew C. Alarcon, D.D., Archbishop of Caceres. At this point, to formally open and welcome us in this venerable institution, I'd like to call on the University-elect President of Ateneo de Naga University, Father Aris D. of the Society of Jesus. Father Ari.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christian Cordero, Director of our University Press, Attorney Jun Sales, Chairman of our board, who is with us also this morning. I'd like to share that when I was a graduate student in London more than 10 years ago, I was invited by an association of Bicolanos to celebrate Mass on a boat as it cruised the Thames River. So I said yes for the novelty of the experience, slowly coming to understand that it was meant to be a celebration of the feast day of Our Lady of Peña Francia, very loosely linking the activity to the fluvial procession here in Naga. Tickets were very expensive, 40 pounds, because the organizers had to pay for the boat, the rental, the food, and the entertainment. And it was a good experience, and it was my introduction to the devotion to Ina, one that Bicolanos brought with them abroad. Although I felt after the rosary and the Mass, the people were really there for the merriment because there was food, there was Zumba, there was dancing, and it took more than a few hours cruising down the Thames. A very enjoyable afternoon. There is even a church in London where the image of Our Lady of Peña Francia is permanently enshrined, thanks to the power and influence of a Bicolana volunteer in that parish. The parish priest could not say no to her, because she might stop doing all her volunteer work in the church. The late director and artist, Marilu Diaz Abaya, was a friend and colleague of mine at Jesuit Communications. Her last film, released in 2011, was Ikaw ang Pag-ibig. Maybe some of the students are too young to remember that. It came out in 2011, and it was produced by the Caceres Archdiocese under Archbishop Legazpi as part of the tercentenary celebration in 2010. It starred Marvin Agustin as a priest, and he had previously starred in another film by Jescom where he was a seminarian, a deacon. And in this movie, he had leukemia, and his family prayed to Ina for healing, and of course, many other things happened. We organized a London screening for that film and pulled it off with Ina's intercession. And for me, that was a deeper introduction to her, to witness the deep devotion of the Bicolanos to her. These days, as a new resident of Naga City, long acquainted but not particularly knowledgeable about Our Lady of Peña Francia, I have been quite interested to learn more about her. I was happy to hear from Christian Cordero about this lecture series and happy for the university to host the lectures today, day 2. I listened to the first 2 lectures yesterday from Dr. June Aguilar and Father Andrew Recepcion and learned about the roots of this devotion, much of it coming from below, as it were. The dynamics of this devotion, from the peripheries to the center and from the center to the peripheries, help explain the enduring strength and power of Ina in the Bicolano worldview and the intimacy that many feel towards her. If Filipinos relate with her in general as Mama Mary, Bicolanos relate to her as Ina. So we continue our journey today by listening to Professor Ambeth Ocampo, who will tell us more about learning history through material objects. And later this afternoon, Dr. Madi Yakal on the iconography of Ina as it has uniquely developed here in Naga City. Professor Ocampo, of course, needs no introduction and is a quite sought-after speaker. We were colleagues in the past at the Ateneo de Manila School of Social Sciences. He was in history, I was in Chinese studies. And before the pandemic, I remember bumping into him at the Cebu airport where he regaled me with stories about the diaries of the senior President Marcos and the retreat he made with Jesuits undergoing the spiritual exercises and, you know, the open question of what to make of all of those spiritual experiences of the senior Marcos. So he is truly a master storyteller and we are so privileged to have him with us today. Let me thank the University Press, the Holy Rosary Minor Seminary, and the National Book Development Board for organizing this lecture series for us. I welcome all of you to the Ateneo de Naga University, especially as we mark our own milestone this year, the 25th anniversary of our university status. Welcome and have an enriching day ahead. Thank you.
Dios mabalos, Father Ari. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of Ateneo de Naga University, Attorney June Sales. Please. At siyan, may listahan ako kan mga i-acknowledge ko pang mga tao, pero di na kita magparahaloy, tanganing makapod na tulos kita kaining sa tuyang mga kalakawan ngunya na aldaw. We are also live via social media, courtesy of the Caceres Commission on Communications with S, sabi ni Father Tortilla. So, as Father Ari told you, this special exhibition and lecture series is in celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the canonical coronation of Our Lady of Peña Francia. This multimedia exhibition, which we will unveil tomorrow, aims to locate significant historical events in the history of our devotion to Our Lady of Peña Francia. By way of curating selected artifacts relevant to the devotion, we set the goal of giving our devotees and pilgrims a renewed perspective on Mary's role as our Queen and Mother. So from September 8, tomorrow is Mama Mary's birthday, until October 7, the exhibition will run at the Holy Rosary Seminary, minor seminary beside the cathedral. Students can avail of their discounts. Si mga dating estudyante pwede pa man, okay? Si mga senior high school citizens. 5 lectures of provocations we have prepared. The topics will revolve around the practice of historical methods, the power and meanings of religious iconographies and objects, including our aspirations as to how we will continue to preserve and share this most valued gift of faith. The title of this exhibition is lifted. We cite. The committee is very careful on citation. We cite. The title of this exhibition is lifted from Fenella Canel's Power and Intimacy in the Christian Philippines, published by Cambridge University Press, and will be republished by Ateneo de Naga University Press very, very soon. We're negotiating with the rights. The book is a compelling read on the subjects of anthropology, of Religion and Post-Colonial Cultures. CANEL's fieldwork of studies is the Bicol region, particularly Calabanga. Okay, let's bring the yesterday to today's event. Dr. Aguilar and Father Recepcion presented their papers yesterday at the Holy Rosary Minor Seminary. I'd like to make a brief recap. In Aguilar's presentation, he provided a solid historical grounding on the evolution of what he calls a devotion that began at the periphery, which eventually would become a regional, a focal devotion conduit to the Bicolnon identity. Aguilar reread, reevaluated, and represented historical documents on the Peña Francia devotion and invited us to reframe our thoughts and questions, even our long-held views and narratives on the Peña Francia. In Father Recepcion's presentation, he invited everyone to do a counterflow movement of moving from the center to the periphery, to return to Bicol's popular religious practices, as these are rituals and practices that can help us provide our own kind of intimacy and understanding to this intangible bond that connects the Bicolanos to Ina and she to many of us. In yesterday's presentations, which you can all access through the Archdiocese of Caceres and Ateneo de Naga University Press Facebook pages, we were given some anchors of thoughts and reasons to have faith that can help us critically navigate our entangled identities, histories, memories, and imaginations. There are 3 more lectures coming up. Today we have Ambeto Campo and Madi and the Archbishop of Caceres. Today, 2 similar lectures of provocations will help us go into the materiality of our religious devotion and historical meanderings. Sa satuyang pag-agi-agi, sa satuyang mga agi-agi, iibanhan kita. Some kind of possession, maiibanhan kita. A trance towards a new understanding by 2 distinguished speakers. We all invite you to attend to all these experiences today and tomorrow. Join us as we open the special exhibition we have prepared. So this afternoon at 3 p.m., Dr. Yakal will present her paper on the religious iconography. So at this point, mga kaibigan, I'd like you to welcome our very distinguished guest. Maraming dahilan para magsaya tayo. Nakasama natin ngayon ang isang public historian, isang kolumnista sa Philippine Daily Inquirer at guro sa pamantasang Ateneo de Manila. Mga kaibigan, si Professor Ambet Ocampo.
Thank you very much. I'll just fix my... Ano ba to? Okay, hindi ko makita. Sorry about this. This is the problem when you have to change not compatible programs. Okay. So I hope it's working. There we go. I won't use the podium. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. Our talk will be it will talk about artifacts and how we learn about artifacts. In the beginning, I'm hoping, sorry, I'll be here na lang. You can take pictures. This is live streamed, but I just hope that you don't post them because some of the pictures I have stolen from the internet. So I don't want to be liable, but in a public presentation, this is fine. I also want to let you know that some of my books are available on the side, and that if you want them signed, we can do that later. And also, I manage Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channels, so I hope you can like them. If you do open them, please look for the slides that look like this, because there are a number of fake Ambet Ocampo pages. And so to make sure that you have me, you have to look for the ones that look like this. Anyway, I'll just go here again. Okay, so today our talk is very, very simple. It will just make 3 points. One, I will begin by talking about what history is and where we get the ideas of history from old Tagalog dictionaries. And then I will talk about the Cabinet of Curiosities and how this became the modern museum. And then we will go into an exploration of history from material objects. First, we should talk about history. What is history? And when we ask people, what is your translation of the word history? They usually give you 2 words. One is historia, which comes from Spanish. The other one is kasaysayan, which is supposed to be Filipino. But my big question there is that kasaysayan did not actually mean history in the beginning. So my big question has always been, when did kasaysayan become history? When we look at the Western words for history, like Geschichte in German, or Histoire in French, or Historia in Spanish, from which we get the Tagalog Historia, it's not kasaysayan, the root word of all these Western words is a story. History is a story. It is a narrative. Later on, it became a narrative of the past. But the root word for all of this actually comes from ancient Greek, and the word is historie. And when you look at historie, it doesn't mean history. Historie actually means an inquiry. So in a sense, it is the quality of history, not the word. So if you become more precise about it, historie in ancient Greek actually means knowledge from inquiry, meaning you ask and you get the answer. So which is why we have that Socratic method, question, answer, because if you do not ask questions, you will never get an answer. If you do not ask questions, you will never learn. So today, I want you to go through with me through old dictionaries. One of my strange habits is that I like to read old dictionaries. It's a very perverse thing to do. There are a number of old dictionaries. The oldest Tagalog dictionary is from 1613, Tagalog, published in Pila, Laguna. Then there was a Jesuit dictionary, 1754, and then another one, this time by a Dominican, in 1794. So these 3 dictionaries are the ones that we will look at today. I was happy to see that the 1860 Jesuit dictionary, translated from the original Spanish to Tagalog, is actually available in the counter. But when I was reading, and the reason why I like looking at old dictionaries, especially when I was in Ateneo in my freshman year, I went to the Rizal Library, looked up the dictionaries, and I looked at it to look at bad words, because I wanted to know what is the origin of bad words. And I was very surprised, for example, during the pandemic, to see from this dictionary of 1794, it actually even gives you the usage. There are 2 ways to do it, that one and that one. And actually, when I read it, it was only then, because I always, as a boy, I used to hear the second one, and I never knew what it was. And it was only by reading the dictionaries that I found that there are actually 3 words for the female anatomy. What's that? Poki is for a maiden, and then there is pokiki, which means it is for a child, and then bowa is for an old woman. So it depends on how it is used. So anyway, but that's topic for another lecture. Today we'll talk about history again, and one of the things that changed my life was when the national artist for literature, Virgilio Almario, very, very early in 1986, inscribed this wonderful book of poetry. It's called Alamat at Historia, but he was very clever. He covered the A with brackets and the H. So legend and history becomes, lamat is a defect, no? A defect and a story. And then he wrote there that I was a tagapagpalaganap, a popularizer of history, but then he put the H in brackets, which means, I don't know if he was being insulting or not, but I'd like to think he likes me. So this is something that has bothered me for many years. But let's look at kasaysayan again. When you look at Historia, again, it means a story. But if you look at the earliest Tagalog dictionary, you will see that Historia is translated as salita. And when I first saw this, I said, salita. In Tagalog today, salita means word. So how can history be a word? And then I realized that Historia can also mean cuento or a story. So the usage is given in 1613, and it says, magsalita ka ng balangang magaling na salita. So you tell me a good story. Then there's another usage. It says, ituloy mo na ang salita mo, which today we will mean continue your story. But if you read the original Spanish, it says, acaba tu historia, meaning finish your story. So when I read this, I realized that Pinoys are not a reading and writing culture. Marites tayo since the 17th century. So salita means spoken word. So history is oral. It is not written down, which we will get into later. So in 1794, Historia is still translated as salita, and they give the usage. Very nice. Magaling na salita, a good story. Anong salita mo? What story do you bring? And this is what I like. Walang katapusan ng salita mo at walang punot dolo. Your story has no end, is endless. It has no beginning, no end. Which means a story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You don't just talk and talk and talk without purpose. So by looking at the words for history, it gave me the qualities that history requires in order to become history. So the two Jesuit dictionaries, again, 1832, Historia Salita, Cuento, Sukseso, Narrative, Event, and then 1860, they removed two, it still became Salita. But when I was in the University of the Philippines, all of us in the 80s were drawn by Seius Salazar's Pantayong Pananaw. He said that kasaysayan is a better word than historia, one, because it is Tagalog, or Filipino, and second, he says it is rooted in two words, salaysay, which means a narrative, or saysay, which means sense or meaning. So it's very nice when you think about it. It's not just a story, but it is a story that means something to the person who is reading it. So it really was very mind-blowing for us to hear this, or for me to hear it in the late 1980s. But then during the pandemic, I had nothing better to do. I said, I'll check na nga and look at the words salaysay and saysay. And I found that salaysay means to declare. And the synonym of salaysay is actually saysay. So I said, how come Salazar says this is sense or meaning when the old dictionaries say that it is the same word? So when I looked it up, I found out that salaysay means to declare, salaysay means to explain, salaysay means to order things, and more importantly, salaysay means to untangle. So these are the qualities of what makes history a story. It must declare, it must explain, and saysay is like husay, meaning you put things in order, different things you order in a particular way. And more importantly, saysay means untangling hair. Yung buhol-buhol na buhok, aayusin mo. So when I saw that, I said it's a more interesting way of looking at the word history and how history came about. That's why we have kasaysayan. Finally, we ask ourselves if salaysay and saysay both mean history or a narrative, when did history become kasaysayan? So in 1860, historia is salita, and then there was another word called historieta, which was munting salitang walang kasaysayan. So when I saw that, it meant it is a small or insignificant story which does not have order, sense, harmony, and is not untangled. So when I looked at it, again, we can revise and go update Dr. Salazar and see that kasaysayan actually means order, harmony, untangling. It is like husay. And our big question then is, when did saysay become sense or meaning? So we will leave that for some other scholar to study. But just to end for this, in 1613, the word history was translated as salita, which means cuento or historia. But salita also means discovery, to discover. So when I looked at it, history goes back to that ancient Greek sense of getting to know something by inquiring. So history then, I'd like to start out today with telling us that history is a story. It is a story not merely about data or chronology. Unfortunately, that's the way that history is usually taught, just make you memorize or you do the which comes first. But history is more than that. History is not about memorizing things. I don't let my students memorize because whatever it is that you need today, we don't have to practice memory because we can find it on our phones. So there must be a different way of touching history, a different way of learning history, and it is actually to see history that declares and explains the past. It is a history that provides order and harmony in that chronology. History is a story that needs discovery. And more importantly, history is a complicated story that needs to be entangled. So when you look at it, history then is not just the story of the past, but it is a story that we have to discover. And you will learn, if you study real history, that history is complicated. So it is a story that has to be untangled. So today, we will talk about artifacts and how this makes history livable. But let's look first at the title Cabinet of Curiosities. In the 16th century in Europe, people had usually kings and princes and cardinals and popes. They had little rooms where they kept curious objects, usually natural science. So like you can see, there's a crocodile, there's shells, there's fish. Then they would collect curiosities, two-headed cows, and other things. No? So they arranged all of these in their cabinet. So the cabinet can be a big walk-in closet, or it can be a little table with wonderful things in it. So the closest thing we can have to it is the University of Santo Tomas Museum. This is the real Cabinet of Curiosities. You go inside, and you know, today kasi they arranged it, it's modern. But when I went here as an undergrad in the 1980s, you're going to knock, kasi nobody goes there. You have to knock, then an old man will open the door, it's dark, you go inside and you see stuffed animals, santo, ang gulo-gulo niya. And sometimes, while I think this arrangement is nice, for a young person, yung magulo, it had a sense of mystery and excitement and discovery. No? Of course, the National Museum of the Philippines is also a cabinet of curiosities. We have 3 buildings filled with different kinds of objects. And many students come here on a field trip. The teacher tells them, shut up, line up, and then they go room by room by room, and they have to finish before. They finish the museum in 30 minutes because they had to watch Eat Bulaga. More time was given to Eat Bulaga than the museum. But so when the kids just walk through, They see, but they do not notice. And I always tell my students that we go on through life, we see things, but we do not notice them. And what makes life worth living is actually seeing, and more importantly, noticing. So, when you look at it again, to find the story of anything is to find relevance. And in the past, history was based on written records. But today, we're going to talk about history not from a written record, but from artifacts. So, these are my students before they were thrown out of the National Museum. They photographed themselves, and they were thrown out kasi they were trying to copy the spoliarium. And the reason of the guards in the museum is that it's disrespectful. It is, tapos sabi ko, they don't bother anybody. Kinokopya lang naman nila eh. This is their way of relating to the object. But bawal yan. You cannot do that today. So when I complained, they now want to make the spoliarium more interactive. So the National Museum has now organized yoga classes in front of the spoliarium. So para, magme-meditate ka, yan ang tinitingnan mo, no? And I said, it's not even conservation-wise, it's bad kasi you're breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. So it's actually damaging the painting. But anyway, so I hope one day they will still allow my students to copy the spoliarium. But the point here is, history is usually based on written records. That's why Agoncillo used to say, no document, no history. And when you hear the word prehistoric, we think of dinosaurs and cavemen. But technically, prehistoric or prehistory means it is the period before written records. So in the Philippines, our prehistory starts from the 9th century and down. When I was sitting in the University of the Philippines, one of my wonderful experiences was meeting the late E. Arsenio Manuel. He gave a class on Philippine prehistory. He was 90 years old. He was partly deaf and partly blind. So when he went to class, the 3-hour class, the students went to the canteen, ate, and then came back after 2 hours. Hindi niya alam kasi bulag naman siya at bingi. So you had to shout at him. But I think on the first day of class, because he knew that I was sitting in, it was the only day he wrote on the board. The whole semester he never wrote. He only wrote one thing on the board, and I think it was meant for me. He said, where history ends, anthropology begins. And he says, Ambet, ikaw hanggang written document. How old is a written document? The oldest document is the Laguna copper plate, 9th century. What do you do before the 9th century? That's where anthropology begins. And that's why for a while, I gave up history. I tried to be an archaeologist, but I gave up kasi ang dami palang natsay nung archaeology. Kaya nga ako nag-historian kasi walang math at science. And then nakita ko ang dami palang, you had to take anatomy, botany, chemistry, physics. Sabi ko, wag na lang. And the other thing was that a historian works in a library. He works in an archive, aircon. Pero pag archaeologist ka, you're in the field digging up. Sabi ko, wag na lang. Doon na lang ako sa aircon. But the point here was, when Manuel told me this, it changed the way in which I do history. And so my friends usually say, I should have been an anthropologist rather than a historian because I like looking at objects and I like getting stories from objects. So, we'll go back. Before the National Library and Museum was destroyed in 1945, they published a catalog of paintings and sculptures. A lot of these are all gone. But when I looked at the catalog, like this is number 1, of course, historical objects. There's an armchair that was owned by Apolinario Mabini, another chair owned by Aguinaldo, another chair owned by Bonifacio, and another chair owned by Rizal. So ano yan? You'll go to the museum, puro upuan, di ba? But they were chairs that were associated with our heroes. Fortunately, most of these are all gone. But more importantly, there was even not only chairs, meron pang bottle and glass of Aguinaldo. Anin mo yun, no? Bote at saka inuman. But on top of that, you see number 13, bolo of Andres Bonifacio. Meron pang picture. We don't know where this is, but when I did the research, I found out that there were about 6 bolos of Andres Bonifacio. So sabi ko, ba't ang dami? Either A, he had 1 bolo for each day of the week, or B, 5 of them are fake and only 1 is true, or all of them are fake. But anyway, yan ang paniwala. Fortunately, it was destroyed during the war, so wala na tayong question. But more interesting was that in the National Museum before the war, there was the garrote. And then the description is this famous garrote was used in Bilibid prison in the execution of criminals. It is believed to be the same garrote used on Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. So this photograph was taken during the American period. This is not an actual execution. Kinuha nila yung nagbebenta ng dirty ice cream sa labas. Umupo ka dito, kukuha tayong picture. So umupo siya, kinuha ng picture, which shows you how the garrote works. So when I looked at it, I realized that kasi di ba when you watch movies, yung parang they're slowly strangling. No, all public executions have to be swift and supposedly painless. So the garrote, they tighten the metal iron collar here, and then with 1 or 2 twists, it will break your neck. So technically, it's supposed to be painless. But nobody has returned to tell us whether that's real or not. So we will take their word for it. No? And then yun din, maniwala kayo, I don't know if you go, especially the guys, when you have a haircut, then the barber will give you the lagutok na. Yung sarap nung ganon. I stopped doing that. I was reminded of the garrote because I was in one barber shop, tinitingnan ko yung katabi ko, ginanon, di ba? Saya yung tao. Nung second na ganon, gumanon na lang yung ulo. Naayos naman nila, pero after that, I never have my thing done. So this is the garrote. It makes you think about it. Unfortunately, it was destroyed. You know, the first instrument like this that I saw was in Vietnam. They had a guillotine, which was created by a doctor named Dr. Guillotine because they had to dispatch people quickly and painlessly. No? So they questioned the use of the guillotine because when Louis XVI was executed, they get the head and then they show it to the people, and it was claimed that the eyes of the head daw was moving. So kahit daw decapitated, like a chicken daw, you cut off the head, the body can still run. The head actually feels pain. Anyway, in Vietnam, when I went in the 90s, I was alone in the museum, so I saw the guillotine. So ang ginawa ko, ang ganda pala, nandito. So since walang tao, I went through the rope and then I sat in the guillotine to get the feeling of what it's like. And then when I was lying down, I saw that the blade was still installed. So of course, I sat down. And then in my mind, I was already thinking, naku, kung nahulog ito, lahat ng tabloid sa Manila, di ba, historiador, tatanga-tanga, di ba, patay. So if this was around, I would have tried it. But anyway, again, more stories from we remember Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, right? Some years ago in Pinoy Big Brother, there was this contestant who was asked, what is the acronym of Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora? And then her answer was Majoha. And sabi ko, alam mo, mas complicated nga yan because she got the real names. That's Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. So, but anyway, that's what they think. And this is the picture that we always think of them in that way. But I do not believe that they were ever photographed together. I think long before Photoshop was created, gumagawa na tayo ng fake picture. And I think one of the ones, he didn't do it to fake people, but to make history more palatable. I think it was Alfonso Ongpin. This is the earliest picture, 1908, of the 3 priests together. So, when I was looking at it, parang hindi yata totoo. But the interesting thing here is because of the historical commission, if you go to Savage Mind, you will see facsimiles of the Noli and the Fili. The Noli has that cover, the Fili has this cover. We presume the cover of the Fili has the 3 priests. That's not true. Because if you go to the National Library, you will see the Noli has the original cover drawn by Rizal. The Fili has no cover illustration. That was created by the Historical Commission, and people think it's real. But then you ask yourself also, these are the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, Zamora. Bakit Gombursa? If we do it alphabetically, it should be Burgoza, di ba? Or baliktad, Zagobu. Bakit naging Gombursa? We get that because Jose Rizal gave us that order. Dahil si Rizal siya, we follow his ordering. Then, we ask ourselves, were these three people actually photographed together? A few years ago on the internet, another photograph came out. There are not three, there's five. Although there are two people who did not become famous, no, inalis na lang sila. No, so, we don't know, di ba? What is this all about? So again, we go to artifacts. This is the original text of Rizal's El Filibusterismo. Just, and Ambet is always the trivial, no? Look, when I study it, you'll see El Filibusterismo, the continuation of the Noli. But before he wrote continuation, you will see he wrote segunda, and he started. It was supposed to be second part of the Noli. Then he erased and he wrote. Of course, continuation and second part are the same. But I guess Rizal meant something else, and we should look at it. But look at it this way. Bakit siya Gomez, Burgos, Zamora? Because Rizal dedicated it to the three priests, and the arrangement was Gomez, Burgos, Zamora. This is the handwritten version. He made a mistake. It's not Francisco Gomez. It's actually Mariano Gomez, di ba? And then, when he was writing, he did not know the date of the execution, so it was left blank, but it's actually, and he wrote later, February 28. We find out later na, when you look at it, he even gave the ages of the priests. Gomez is 85, he was actually 73. Burgos is 30 daw, he's actually 35. Jacinto was 35, but he's actually 37. So, the lesson here is, just because he is Rizal does not mean he's always correct. Diba? Huwag ka maniniwala lagi pag sinasabi niya. But the real significance of 1872 is not because they killed him. We have two great texts. The first one by Jose Rizal, who says, without 1872, I would have been a Jesuit. Hindi totoo yan. You can ask Father Ari. If Rizal applied as a Jesuit in 1872, they would not have taken him because they did not take natives. Diba? So, OA lang ni Rizal yan. The second one is, in the 60s, Teodoro Agoncillo said, there is no Philippine history before Gombursa. Everything before 1872 is not our history. It is the history of Spain in the Philippines. We should not study it. We only study from 1872 onwards. I'd like to think maybe Agoncillo did not want to research na lang before 1872, so he cut it there. But the point there was he changed the way in which we look at our past. But this was what I learned from Onofre Corpus. He says, we're always looking at these things about 1872. But what is the relevance of 1872? In 1872, Rizal was 11. Bonifacio was 9. Apolinario Mabini was 8. Luna was 6. Emilio Aguinaldo was 3. And the two heroes, Jacinto and Del Pilar, were not even born in 1872. What does this mean? This means that when Gombursa was killed, our heroes were children. And they were so terrified hearing about Gombursa that it changed the way in which they think and they live. So when you think about it, again, let's look at it that way. Rizal published the Noli at 26. Luna painted the Spoliarium at 27. Emilio Aguinaldo, who is the president we all love to hate, became president at 29. When you think about it, what does a 29-year-old Filipino do today? Diba? Emilio Aguinaldo fought Spain. He fought the United States of America. College dropout. The farthest he has been abroad was Hong Kong and Singapore. He was not very bright, but he became president and led the country in forging the nation. So for that, we should remember him. And not only do we remember Aguinaldo because we only see this picture. Based on my research, they cropped out pala a photo bomber in the back. Di ba? Sino yan? Di ba? So, it's not only Aguinaldo we should remember, but all the other people who are forgotten or cropped out of the picture. The oldest person was Bonifacio, led the revolution at 32. So, when you look at it, our 19th century heroes all knew each other, and most of them were below 40. That shows us, even today, the Philippines is a young nation, filled with young people, filled with promise. And that is what 1872 should remind us of, to become greater than we are and make the Philippines a better place. So, I always tell people that the Philippines is a young nation. If you count how old we are, you can either count from 1898, June 12, or you can count from 1946, July 4. So technically, we're a young nation, but when you look at our history, it is very old. And we look at our prehistory, it is thousands of years old. And part of that story we see through artifacts. I have a lot of artifacts today, but today we will talk about the artifacts that made us a nation. We'll look at artifacts from the 1890s. When I went to the house of Emilio Aguinaldo, this was the first curious object I saw. Merong bato. So I asked them, ano po yan? Yan yung bato na inupuan ni Aguinaldo. Ba't nyo dinala dito? Diba? Galing pa ho yan sa Palahanan, sa Isabela. Ganun ba? So anyway, ang dami naman batong mapupulot, no, dadalin mo. So I look at the house, and then if you go to that house, you ask them to open the medicine cabinet. Actually, nakasara yan. So I asked them to open it, and I was taking pictures. The cabinet is full of these blue bottles. It's eye drops. Kasi in his old life, Aguinaldo had problems with eyesight. So ito yung gamot niya. So I was taking pictures here. What people do not realize is that there are two bottles which people do not mind. May laman na parang maruming object sa loob. I found out that this was actually Aguinaldo's appendix. So there's a picture. This is the appendix. No, the appendix is on the left pala. And then on the right, there is a Gasa Misteriosa, a mysterious gauze, no, 1920. Sabi ko, ano ito? Di ba? Since it used to have alcohol, it was preserved, but nawala yung alcohol, wala na, so tuyot na. So they were saying, ay, Ambeto Campo, why are you looking at that? Aguinaldo's pickled appendix. Ano yan? Trivial ka na naman. But I can show you how a trivial pickled appendix tells you so much more. This is Aguinaldo in 1919. He was in PGH, Philippine General Hospital. Tapos it was flag day, so they gave him a flag. Smile kayo, kukunan kayong picture. So nilagyan siya kasi flag day. But this picture, I found another one that says, what I went through because of appendicitis. He was in the hospital from October 1919 to August 1920 for appendicitis. Sabi ko, ba't ang tagal naman niyang nandyan? Then I realized pala what happened, and that's why you have those two bottles. First, they removed Aguinaldo's appendix. Then they closed him up. And while he was recovering, ay parang masama pa rin pakiramdam ko sa loob. Hindi, inalis na namin appendix, wala nang hindi, may nararamdaman pa ako. Because there was no MRI, no ways of doing it non-invasively, they had to open him up again. And they found out that one of the surgeons forgot a towel inside. Nung sinara nila may tuwalya. So, they got the towel, they cut it, and Aguinaldo put it in a little bottle. So, because the government was so ashamed that Aguinaldo went through this, the government gave Aguinaldo a life pension in 1920. And then if you look at it, March 24, 1920, which is his birthday, the Philippine legislature gave 12,000 pesos a year, 1,000 a month ang kanyang pension. But for some reason or another, in January 1, 1939, they removed Aguinaldo's pension. And that pension was only restored in 1957. So when you look at it, the story of Aguinaldo's pension, bakit binigyan, tas ba't inalis? Who was the president in 1939? O yan, guess. Anyone? Begins with Q. Quezon, di ba? So, our big question here is, when I study this, do we remember Aguinaldo the way that we do because of what we see? But I think Aguinaldo is remembered not as a hero because he lived too long. So sometimes longevity can be negative. Diba? Kung namatay siya, Apolinario Mabini once told Aguinaldo, in order to be remembered, you must die in the battlefield. And Aguinaldo probably replied, kung gusto mo, mauna ka. Di ba? Ba't ako mamamatay? So he lived long. He outlived all his enemies. But yet, in the eyes of his people, he got less and less as he grew older. I'd like to think that maybe the way that we see Aguinaldo negatively was because he fought against Quezon in the 1935 Commonwealth elections. So there were three people in the running: Aguinaldo, Aglipay, relics of the revolution, and Manuel Quezon, who actually won it. When I was looking at history, I found out, the whole question of sino pumatay kay Antonio Luna at kay Bonifacio, si Aguinaldo, that all comes out in the late 1920s and the 1930s. It comes out because of politics. And I found out later that one of the historians, the American historians, was close to Quezon, and he was looking for material, historical material for and against Aguinaldo, and he was sending this to Quezon. So what you see here is Quezon used history against Aguinaldo. Not only that, so you see here pa another example of Craig feeding Quezon with anti-Aguinaldo material. So, Quezon used history against Aguinaldo. He also used the powers of his office against Aguinaldo. So, look at this. I only found this a few months ago in the University of Michigan, looking at the Quezon papers. Quezon is not my period, but I was looking at this Austin Craig, and to my great surprise, July of 1939, 1939, Quezon wrote to Miguel Cuaderno, the manager of the Philippine National Bank, and he says, give me information regarding the death of Emilio Aguinaldo, and I want the data in my house by Friday evening. So pinadadala pa sa bahay niya. And that was not the only document. So, there was another document to the Director of Lands. Give me a report on all the land that is occupied by Aguinaldo, but he did not pay for it. Send it to my house by Friday night. Then there was a third one, a letter to the Insular Treasurer. Tell me the audit of the veterans of the Revolution and send it to my house by Friday. So when I looked at this, Aguinaldo was gathering data to use against Aguinaldo politically. So, when we look at it, what do we make about all this? Nagalit yata si Aguinaldo. Anyway. So, what we see here is Aguinaldo is complicated. And our view, our memory of Aguinaldo is actually colored by the politics of his time. So, it shows you history that we get is colored. So, we must, I think, reconsider Aguinaldo and our history based on fact, not on emotion. Ang turo kasi sa eskwela, sinong nagpapatay kay Bonifacio? Anong feeling mo? Hindi feeling yan. No? You look at the data and we study the facts and come up with a conclusion. So let's look at some artifacts. If you go to Aguinaldo's house, you will see this desk. May ulo ng kalabaw. Aguinaldo felt that the carabao was the national animal kasi it helped during the Phil-American War. So, the Independence balcony is supported by a carabao na nakadila pa sa mga tao, di ba? Parang belak, nakaganyan. When I looked at this, sabi ko, ba't puro kalabaw? If you look at Harper's History of the War, there's this wonderful illustration of the Americans being attacked by carabaos. And the story is that if you read the account, in April 1899, the Filipinos and General Lawton were fighting. Then the carabaos went in the middle, and then they attacked the Americans. So tumakbo yung mga Pinoy, kawawa yung mga Amerikano. Then again, it says in Mekawayan, one man's leg was, the carabaos attacked the the American soldiers. So the Americans said, baka parang bull yan. Yung bull ayaw ng red. Yung kalabaw, ayaw niya yung color ng uniform ng Amerikano na blue. Kaya daw yun yung sinusuwag. That was one theory. The other theory was, how come they don't attack the Pinoys? Kasi daw, the Carabaos know the smell of a Pinoy and they don't like the smell of the Amerikano. Kasi hindi daw naliligo. Then the third theory that I found so amusing was, the Carabaos didn't like the smell of the Americans because they were not circumcised. So when you look at it, this again, it comes from one picture. And then when you dig it up, you will find many other things. Okay, Carabao, 1934. Emilio Aguinaldo sent a table to the White House, to Franklin Roosevelt. Look at the table. It's 9 feet diameter. Can you imagine how big the tree was to create the tabletop? And look how shiny it is. Diba? It's like a mirror. Oh, Aguinaldo can see his reflection on this. And so when I dug up the New York Times, I found out table for Roosevelt is a gift of Aguinaldo, etc., etc. The piece weighs a ton, no? And they could not put it in the cabinet room. They put it in some other room. So later on, there are 12 drawers. So there's a description of what this great table was. But the base of the table were Carabaos. The problem there was, yung Carabao, sinusungay daw yung mga tao. So if you're not bright, when you walk, matatamaan mo yung Carabao. So one day, 1949, naisip la, ay nako, these Carabaos are menace. So nilagari nila yung mga kalabaw, inalis, they put in a bodega. And then later on, a White House executive saw the Carabaos in the bodega. Ay, ba't nandito to? Ibalik natin. So he put it back in the table. Nasungay na naman yung mga tao. So the thing there is, the president's aide, a certain General Vaughan, came around and said, those things are a menace. They should come down. So pinatanggal na naman yung mga Carabao. But the thing there is, when Quirino visited the White House in 1949, the reporter said, ay, look at this table. Oh, may sira. And so Quirino said, okay, I will replace the table. And what he said there, Quirino says, I promise to give a better one. Because when this table was sent, our nation was still cracked. But today, our nation is whole. So I will send you a new one. So he sent the new one. And the nice thing about research today, in the past, I would have to go physically to Washington to get this. But today, online, I can find the daily appointments of Truman. And then here, you actually see Carlos P. Romulo giving the Quirino table with Carabaos to President Truman. And then this is the voice. May recording pa. You will hear Romulo talking.
9 May 1952.
This is Romulo talking.
Mr. President, for and in behalf of the President of the Philippines, I have the pleasure to present to you this table as his personal gift to you. Also as a token of the esteem and regard in which you are held by the people of the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Then Truman
Ambassador.
replies.
I hope to convey my thanks to the President of the Philippines and tell him that I appreciate the gift immensely. The table that was in here in this lobby previously was presented to the government of the United States by the Philippine government, and I have sent it to the Smithsonian
So the old table was
museum
sent to the museum.
because it was cracked in the middle, the heat or something had some
So
effect
it's
on it.
medyo magulo, no?
And
But anyway,
I'm
they looked at it, and of course, this one, the Carabaos were inside na. Hindi na siya makakasungay. But Truman says, this is how the reporters, White House reporters, used the Aguinaldo table. Inuupuan nila, lalagyan nila ng damit, di ba? So eventually, that was what it was used for. But later on, this became the Quirino table, and that's when you go in to the president's office. So what you see here is that fake news is not new. It is as old as history. And I'll give you another example. This is William Howard Taft, on a Carabao, 1914. Famous picture. Ang galing naman, no? Taft was not only first civil governor of the Philippines, he became President of the United States and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Pero hindi natin siya kilala. But he got his best job when he was in Manila. I found out later that this photograph pala is fake. It's Photoshop on another picture that was taken in the White House. He's actually riding a horse. And there's a story pa nga that says that Taft was 300 pounds. Mainit sa Manila. There was no aircon. So he developed Baguio so that in the summer they could all go up to Baguio and cool themselves. That's why it's called the summer capital. Up to today, kasi today we have aircon, but before, in the summer, the whole government goes up to Baguio. That's why when you go to Baguio, there's Cabinet Hill, there's a Secretary of Public Works, Secretary of Trade, all the secretaries, vice presidents, senators, congressmen, they have a cottage. Today, only the Supreme Court goes up to Baguio, following that tradition. Anyway, Taft messaged the Secretary of War, I went on horseback up to Baguio, 5,000 miles. I rode the horse for 25 miles. And the Secretary of War replied to Taft, how is horse? Diba? Kasi kawawa daw, mabigat. But anyway, when you look at it, let's put the pictures side by side. If you will look at the horse picture, you will see that Taft's pants have exactly the same folds. You look at his coat, it's exactly the same folds. And then look at it. The clincher is this. To guide a horse, the reins have to control the mouth and the nose. You look at the Carabao picture, the reins only go to the ears. So mali yan. So we act something that was 100 years old, which we used to be. A photograph does not lie, sabi nila. But today, with social media, photographs and videos can sometimes lie. So the thing here is, remember, we always have to validate things to make sure they are true. But most of the time, we are too lazy to do that. So history teaches us not only to go back to the primary sources, but also to validate. This is what my library looks like. People say, ang galing, no? Nabasa mo na ba lahat ng libro na yan? Hindi, no? And then maayos yan kasi may photo shoot. Pero pag wala ang gulo-gulo niyang aking library. In my library, this is my cabinet of curiosity. So people have been looking, zeroing in on objects inside, no? A bust of Nick Joaquin Villa. But some of my favorite objects are these ones. This is a silver pen. I bought it from an antique dealer. Tutunawin nila, scrap silver. It was 1 bayong of silver. Sabi, ang ganda nitong feather. Magkano po ito? It was black, no? Tinimbang niya. Lumabas parang 200 pesos. So binayaran ko siya. When I went home, I cleaned it, and then I saw that there was a name on the ribbon. It was for a prize for a poetry contest, and the winner was a man named Emilio Jacinto. So this was Jacinto's silver quill. If I didn't find it, tinunaw na, nawala na siya. The one on the left is Mabini's hair. When they exhumed Mabini's hair, someone from the Historical Institute pulled out a notch of hair, brought it to Manila. Tapos yung mga tao sa Manila, ay naku, tapon mo yan kasi baka multuhin tayo. Hindi pwede, nalibing na ulit si Mabini. So they wanted to throw it out. So I went, sabi ko, kung tatapon nyo na lang, bigyan nyo naman ako ng konti, pero ayoko yung scalp pa, yung buhok lang. So they gave me, so I have on my desk a lock of Mabini's hair. The other thing I found in an antique shop was this one. It was a batch of papers. Kasi makulit ako so tingin-tingin. Tapos nakita ko, Julian Felipe, taga Cavite, 51 years old, professor of music. Sino pa ba yan? Then that's the guy who did the national anthem. Magkano po ito? 100 pesos. Ang mahal naman. Pwede bang 20? Tapos sabi na, hindi pwede. 40 na lang. So I paid 40 and I ran away. Kasi baka So I kept it for many years, and then when I posted it on Facebook, galit na galit yung mga tao. Kasi pinagsamantalahan mo yung tao, di ba? Ba't mo binili ng mura? Ba't mo tinawaran? Sabi ko, gago ba ako? Sasabihin ko sa kanya, this is worth more than 100 pesos. Problema niya yun, di ba? So anyway, I have it. And that's one of the things that I own. But the thing there is, let's go today to Julian Felipe, who wrote the march that is now our national anthem. It was commissioned on June 1898, and he finished it in a number of days. Felipe is actually a musical plagiarist, because when you listen to the anthem, the first bars of the hymn is a Spanish martial song. The last bars is from the French national anthem. Kasi nagmamadali, no? So gumawa na lang siya. But in the old National Library, he gave the copy of the piece that he wrote for piano, 11 June 1898. Nasunog ito nung gera. And then later on, he gave another copy, meron ng words. Wala yung words nung una. That's why the anthem is so hard to sing, because it was just music to be played when the president is walking. Wala siyang lyrics, no? And then in the Newberry Library in Chicago, I found a printed copy of the anthem. Ang ganda-ganda, it has a flag, di ba? And then it says, "To my dear country, Julian Felipe, premiered in Kawit on June 12, 1898. And then more importantly, it was made for piano. I will let you hear today the music as Aguinaldo heard it the first time, yung wala pang orchestra. And we know how fast it is, not only with the horns, but he gave the time signature, yung chik, 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 chik. So what I did was, I sent this to Ryan Cayabyab, national artist for music. He wanted me to sing the anthem, no? Hindi ko kaya. And then sabi ko, Ryan, pwede mo bang tugtugin ito following the metronome, so we can hear it. So he played it, and this is how Aguinaldo heard it the first time. That's how Aguinaldo heard it. Tapos, tugtugin mo nga uli, tugtugin mo uli. He played it a number of times. Then, Aguinaldo called the generals, pakinggan nyo nga ito, ayan, maganda. And that became our national anthem. So it was composed for piano, arranged for band. It was just incidental music. It had no lyrics until later Jose Palma made lyrics. And then it was translated from Spanish to Filipino. So the thing there is, we always ask ourselves, counterfactuals. What if we sing the national anthem because Aguinaldo was president? But if Andres Bonifacio did not die and he killed Emilio Aguinaldo, we would be singing a different anthem, an anthem composed by Julio Nakpil, which is nicer than the Julian Felipe thing. So again, these are the things that open us to many questions. This is the flag made by Marcela Agoncillo, Lorenza Agoncillo, and Delfina Herbosa. Diba? Tinahi daw nila. In Malacanang, you even have the thimble that Marcela Agoncillo used. And Aguinaldo brought back the flag on a U.S. cutter, and it was first unfurled on May 28 in a battle in Cavite called Alapan. But when you look at it again, let's look at these things. This is the Independence balcony. Okay? There's Aguinaldo posing. When you look at it, in beginning, in 1898, there was no balcony. That was added in 1919. But as you can see, even in the Ayala Museum, it's wrong. That's what Aguinaldo's house looked like without the balcony yet. But when we look at it, in the old 5 peso bill, it's still the window. Now, look at the Act of Independence. This is now in the National Library of the Philippines. It was stolen. It was returned to the library, and the stupid librarian stamped on it in ink, retrieved by the National Library, date, blah, blah, blah. Tapos hindi pa siya nakontento kasi wala yung pangalan niya, dinagdag pa niya, care of A.M. Bolos. Every page is stamped with her name. That woman should be fined or imprisoned for defacing our Act of Independence. But it talks about that in the town of Cavite, Viejo, on June 12, 1898, blah, blah, blah. But you will see here, nobody reads it. When I first read it, I found out that our independence was given under the protection of the United States, under the protection of the great and humanitarian North American nation. That gives us our freedom. Anong klaseng freedom yan, di ba? And then it describes the flag. White triangle, Katipunan. The 3 stars are Luzon, Mindanao, and Panay. Hindi pa siya Visayas. Then the sun lights the way to progress. The 8 rays of the sun are the 8 provinces placed under martial law. Pero ang turo sa atin, the 8 provinces that first revolted, hindi totoo. They were the provinces that were placed under martial law. Then when you look at it, the flag of the Philippines is red, white, and blue because it copies the flag of the United States of America as a manifestation of our gratitude to this great nation. Yan ang ating independence proclamation. Pati bandera pala natin, kopya sa US flag. So the point here is, what happened here? We had to change certain things. Look at the old flags. Hindi pa siya 8 rays. Oh, iba-iba. Kanya-kanya. And look at this one. Yung bandera, the sun has a face. Tingnan mo, ganyan yung lagi, no? Hindi pa siya sure, and that's why Quezon had to make the flag the same everywhere. No? So Aguinaldo described, so the flag had a face, dinrawing pa niya kung anong itsura. If you go to Kawit, there's this flag with a silver sun and stars. Tingnan mo, merong muka. And this was my favorite, embroidered, kulay red pa, tapos may muka. So the thing there is, I found out that the Constitution, Marcos pala, the old Marcos, in 1985, he says, let's us go back to history. The flag was not dark blue, it was light blue. So in 1985, the Philippine flag looked like that. E nagkagulo. So people started to look for Aguinaldo's flag. Then they found it in Baguio. Ito daw yung original flag. Hindi siya totoo. Then we looked at it. Ano ba yan? So it is dark blue according to Mariano Ponce. This is a painting by Luna made in the Czech Republic in 1899. See, it's neither light nor dark blue. So anyway, this is the Constitution of the Philippines. The flag of the Philippines shall be red, white, and blue with the sun and 3 stars. Walang kulay. So the sun and 3 stars can be pink or red or periwinkle, di ba? So when I was in government, I said, I want an amendment to the Constitution. And I want to put the color of the sun and the 3 stars. Pero gago yung Ambeto Campo. His Gloria Arroyo's secret weapon, he will amend this part of the Constitution and then they will amend the rest of the Constitution. So walang nangyari sa atin. But it shows you that the Constitution is actually incomplete. What color is not specified. So to end, we've gone through a number of things. My advice to the young people who are here is that you should be curious. That's what makes, not just for history, but for basic life. Just to show you how curious I am. One day, I found out they were cleaning the Rizal Monument. Sabi ko, pwede ba ako umakyat? So they put me in a harness. As you can see, I don't go to the gym. So actually, inakyat nila ako to go up. Takot na takot pa nga ako kasi ganyan ang itsura, ang liit pala natin compared to. Pero, you know, this is how big the monument. When you look at it, mukhang maliit. Yung actually pala siya malaki. Then the big challenge was they were cleaning the Bonifacio Monument. Sabi ko, gusto ko umakyat. Nakaabot ako hanggang dito lang kasi hindi ko nakinaya yung aakyat pa dun sa taas. But it shows you how big the monument is. This is Gombursa. no, how big that the things are. So I went up to look at it just to see what it is. So to end, we should always ask. I always tell my students to ask questions because sometimes questions can be more important than the answers. Questions make life what is worthwhile. And therefore, we go back to our beginning of the idea of history, which is knowledge from history, salita meaning it is to discover. So, the point here is, as you can see, the Ambet Ocampo method is getting two things and connecting them. The true magic of history lies in connections. The power of history lies in its relevance. So to end, history refers to a story from the past that has to be discovered. It is a story that is complicated and has to be entangled. Thank you and good morning. Okay.
Dios Mabalos, Professor Ocampo. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the members of the audience who are here, the students and faculty members of Ateneo de Naga University. Siyempre, palakpakan tayong mga taga-Ateneo. The seminarians and formators from the Holy Rosary Major and Minor Seminaries. The officials from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, faculty and students of CBS-UA. I presume this is from the Calabanga campus. The Naga College Foundation, represented by Dr. Aida Osea, the Academic Vice President. The University of Nueva Caceres, the Department of Education, Baal Community College, MWS, MS22, Buyo National High School, mga taga Buyo. Sa inang Buyo? Sa Intabi? Taga Tinambak. Staff of Blue and Gold. Sa atin ito, sa Blue and Gold. Bicol Central Academy. Staff of Maugmang Lugar. Word Ministry, Debate Society, CCCOM, Caceres Commission, Gabay, Kamada, and FFP Department, Junior High School of the Ateneo de Naga University. Si mga day ko po na-acknowledge, pagpasensyahan tamayo pa sa listahan. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Digna Alba, our newly appointed Academic Vice President for Higher Education. This tama. So at this point, I'd like also to acknowledge the member of the Executive Committee, the Exhibition Committee headed by Father Nonilon Bangcaso, Father Nuns Tindog Tabi, Father Francis Tordilia, mga kaiba, Miss Julma Narvades, Julma, tindog na, palakpakan ta, the staff and members of Ateneo de Naga University and our university library, si Rika, tapos si Kokoy Baseday, may kaibanan ngunyan, may nalingawan ako, si Mr. Frank Peñones, si Father Eric Bobis, sakaan iba pa. Igwa kitang mikropono digdi sa tahaw nindo, pwede kitang maghapot ki ambet nin saro o magkaduang hapot. Danga na po dun ko sa mga miyembro kang executive kang exhibition committee saka ang presidente kang Ateneo para sa photo opportunity. So may hapot tabi ka mo and I give it to Ambet again. Igwa? May libreng libro da Pag may libreng libro, matirindog. Igwa tabi kun... Okay, brother, you have a question? Okay. Kung mayo ng hapot, okay. Ano man ta ang Pinoy arogan, kung mayo ng hapot, magagawa na yan. Tapos at siya 5 kita kaini. Diba? Sige, tabi. Ambet.
Good morning po.
Good morning.
Professor Ambet. I am seminarian Jid Francis Nepomuceno from Major Seminary. And aside po sa na-starstruck po ako sa inyo, I would like to ask this question po. If in these modern times where artificial intelligence and fake news emerged, is it still possible to address these fake news, fake issues, problems in a more simple way aside from a thorough research po?
Well, one thorough research actually is necessary, but what you should have in your minds is you should actually always doubt everything that is given to you. You don't believe it. That's what Agoncillo used to teach me. Doubt everything, including your parentage. Tapos sabi ko, ano yan? And then Agoncillo used to say, only your mother knows who your true father is. What I said, para yata, I don't want to go that much, that far. But that's what he was saying. It is built in. And unfortunately, people like me, who were born in the last century, my generation we're called the martial law babies. Naabutan namin yung unang Marcos. When we were growing up, we never, we got pro-Marcos news. Lahat ng dyaryo is all pro-Marcos. So it was built in within us. Now, we never believe everything. We always try to find another story. But today, your generation, because the internet makes it so easy, kung anong lumabas na sa search engine mo, yun na yun. People will not even look at the next hits to see kung are they giving you the same thing. So it's a way of thinking. No, it's always validating, never taking things at face value, always trying to find the truth in all its forms. But again, because of technology, it changes. No, so in the first day of school, I usually ask my students to bring out their phones. And then I give them a simple question. Look at the word, what? Spoon. So all of them will put in spoon. What does it mean? And then I say, you look at the search results of your classmates. And then when you look at it, not all the results are the same. Because what is happening, you must know this, Google is giving you the answers it thinks you want. Google knows a lot more about us than we know ourselves because it's tracking everything that you type into it. And it processes it to give you what you want. So that is the world in which we live in. You really have to validate. So research is important, but validation, just asking the question, is the first step in finding truth. So that's the easiest way to answer that. Any other questions? Yes, please. There's one, and then there's one.
Good morning
Good
po.
morning.
I'm Keone, the Marabias Development Communication student, and I just want to ask po, with the surge of historical revisionism going on in this country, how can we, as part of the educated youth, help combat that, and what can we do to laymanize it for the people and make it more accessible? Because there's a lot of hidden parts of our history that even us na educated, we're not really very much aware of due to limited resources. So how can we help those who don't have access to it and combat historical revisionism and fake news going on in this country? Thank you so much.
Sige. Fake news is basically something that we find on the internet. And do not believe that you have limited information. As I mentioned earlier, when I started doing history 40 years ago, a Filipino historian had to go abroad to get the material. During the pandemic, 8 months ako nakakulong. I found most of the data online. I can open the National Library of Spain in Madrid. I can open the National Library in Paris. I can open the British Library in London from my home. But you will not be able to do that if you do not ask the question. The whole idea of historie or historia salita, it is knowledge from inquiry. It is discovering. So if you do not ask, you will not look. And all that material, much of that material is actually available on the internet. Now, the other thing also is that when I looked at the internet, I found out that there is not one reliable Philippine history creator. So the problem there is academics like me, they don't want to do social media. That's why I just do Facebook. I cannot do TikTok because I cannot dance like Harry Roque. No, and I don't want to dance like Harry Roque. But Ateneo actually offered, because we have a communications department, Ateneo actually offered to produce the Ambet Ocampo TikTok channel. Because we felt that, and that's why, if you watch it, I have my arete, what's this? Magisterial lectures. Sabi ko, whether people watch me or not, if we do not produce the content and throw it online, we have given up to all these Marcos fake news things. So the point here is more historians should actually throw their material online so that when people are looking, are searching, they will be able to use proper material to validate it. So unfortunately, at the moment, I only do Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. But I've been talking to Ateneo. We're going to produce videos because, you know, during the pandemic, when we were all doing online, I was one of the few teachers who kinarir ko talaga yung Canvas. But many of our faculty, that's why they want to go back to school, face-to-face daw. Kasi tamad sila, hindi sila nag-aral ng Canvas. But if you look at my Canvas course, it has links, all the readings are there, you download it, you don't even have to Xerox anymore. There are videos, when you open my Canvas, it opens up the world that I want my student to discover. But not all the teaching content is like that. And then my videos, kasi pandemic, I'm just recording from my screen. Ang baduin niya, di ba? But I said, if we have real production, properly shot, I go to it's like doing 15-minute, 10-minute documentaries that will be easy to watch. And if we arrange it in an order, you can actually take the Ambet Ocampo class online. So that's the next project. But it's very difficult to do kasi as people, if you're a teacher, you will know how difficult it was to do the recording. Kasi magkamali ka, record ulit. You know, if you're doing teaching like this, you're talking, you make a mistake, you can correct it. You can keep quiet to think. No, but if you're watching video, you don't talk for 5 seconds, wala na, papalitan na yung channel. So it has to be properly shot. And that's what I think our next project will be to bring history, the way that I do history, entertaining but validated and true history online. And that's the way in which we hope we will combat. It's fake news, and again, I also want you to remember, people, the Filipinos, we don't know, we're very lax with our use of words. We describe the Marcos changing of history as historical revisionism. That's stupid. It's not revisionism, it is distortion. Because when you revise to correct something that is false. You revise to correct something that is wrong. You do not revise to make something true false. That's distortion. But we keep using the word, paulit-ulit. Ganyan ang Pinoy, hindi nag-iisip. During the pandemic, di ba? You should have social distancing. No! You should never distance socially. You have physical distancing. Pero wala, social distancing, ganyan tayo, hindi tayo nag-iisip. So, you must call things by their proper name. No, we have priests here, they will tell you, I'm so fascinated by the exorcism ritual. What happens in an exorcism? The priest has to get the demon's name. Kaya paulit-ulit, what is your name? What is your name? Because you cannot drive it out unless you have its name. And that's the same principle in social media, the same principle in historical distortion. If you do not call it by its real name, you cannot drive it out. So it's a very complicated process, and I hope you understand how difficult this is in this new age of social media. Sorry, it's a long answer. But
Thank you, Ambet. Father June and Billy of the Society of Jesus, please.
Good morning po, Professor Ambet.
Yes, good morning.
You know, I'm one of the older Jesuits in the house, no? Senior citizen. And you were talking about history, focus on facts, not on emotions. Because I was part of EDSA. And I was already 25 years old when Ninoy was assassinated. It's very hard to separate emotions when you're part of history, I think. I was at EDSA right there. And so, di ba, we just changed the holiday from February 26 to something, and then Ninoy Aquino's holiday from 21 to 23. That pains me. So how do we reconcile emotion and facts when you're part of history?
Again, one of the things that Agoncillo used to say is, you need perspective and you need distance. So when you are part of EDSA, you should not write it, you should wait 10 years after. Because it gives you perspective. You learn other things that you did not know when you were there. So it makes things, and then the emotions are gone, so you look at it more objectively. But today, we do not wait. Social media is real time. So they give us undigested, unreflected material. But it's true, when you talk about the dates, no? It's one of the things I found in the diaries of Ferdinand Marcos. Like, di ba, when was martial law declared? Easy answer, September 21, 1972. You read the newspapers of the time, you will see September 21, may dyaryo pa. When did it actually happen? It happened two nights later. And if you read it, if Marcos actually tells us that he was thinking of declaring martial law as early as September 17 kasi he was superstitious about number 7. So September 17, because sinulat yung decree. But then, I post-dated it to September 21 kasi 3 times 7 mas swerte. So 21. But then, he kept the decree because he was waiting for a sign from God. So the Jesuits always tell me, it's not the Jesuits' fault that Marcos thought he was talking to God. No? So anyway, God gave him the sign, and he actually implemented martial law the evening of the 22nd. So when he comes out on TV to say, I have declared martial law, that's already September 23. So when you think of it, even the date that we think is correct was actually created by Marcos based on his superstitious beliefs. No? So the thing there is, again, what do we do about EDSA? I was also at the time, we're the same age, 25 when Ninoy was, 25. I was 22 when Ninoy was shot. I was in the airport waiting for him when he arrived. Hindi na namin siya nakita, di ba? But the point here is, my students and I was disappointed by the last elections because they chose a president that I felt was not the choice. But the thing there is, should I be upset? It's a new generation. They threw away everything that we lived and fought for. But it is their life, it is their future. So if that's what they want, then we have done our part. And now we leave it to them. But again, we'll see what happens. So where does we need emotion to tell a good story, but we should always temper it with fact, because all story must have, as we can say, it must have husay, it must have order, it must have truth. And that is the difficult part, to sift what is just there for emotion and what is... so history is a complicated discipline, because as things come out, the world changes, our view of history changes. So like as I showed you, Emilio Aguinaldo that we all love to hate, when I read that in Michigan, it made me ask my questions. I mean, of course, Aguinaldo was not perfect, but it shows you how Quezon actually revised the whole way in which the Aguinaldo story is taken. So we have to ask ourselves, is that Is our memory, is our school book lessons on the past accurate and really relevant for us today? So it's a long answer. Yes, we had a young girl who wanted to ask in the back, or did she leave na? Yeah, yes, please.
Last two questions, Ambet.
Oh, sige.
Okay.
Good morning po, Miss Sir Ambeth Ocampo. I am Angel Ann Almalor, a senior high school student from the Ateneo de Naga University. Currently, the thing that has been bothering me is the lack of awareness, or rather the disengagement of the youth, particularly when it comes to history, as they got older. I myself have observed this sort of phenomenon, like I was taught history at a young age during elementary school, but as I grew up and moved on to junior high school until senior high school, I've noticed that some of my peers don't recall basic things about our country's history. So my question is, why do we forget these things? Thank you.
Why do we forget? Because our curriculum is overcrowded, that's one. And then number two, our textbooks are not factually correct. Number three, we really have to change the pedagogy, because whenever I meet a person who says history is boring, I said, you had a bad teacher. You did not have me. Diba? So again, whether it is integral calculus or history, the teacher is always the person who will make you interested or make you hate it. So one, it comes in the classroom. But my problem with the way history is taught in this country is not only the material that has not been vetted, but I have realized in the 40 years I have been teaching that the educational system in the Philippines is geared to produce students who have a blind adherence to authority. Teacher says something, it is correct, even if it's wrong. Textbook is wrong, but it is correct. When actually what you are supposed to learn in all education is actually to learn by yourself, to validate, to be critical of everything, to question everything. But the way our educational system is built, they don't want citizens to question because it becomes subversive. Citizens who will ask, bakit ganyan? Citizens who will stand up and say, things don't have to be the way that they are. Kasi ang sagot ay ganyan na, nakasanayan. No, that's not the way. But the way that we are taught, I look at the way I was taught, I look at the way children are taught. It's blind adherence to authority. No critical thinking. And that's why we are the way that we are. And it will take a generation to actually change that mindset and make people, young people like you, question. And when you question, you get knowledge from inquiry.
Thank you po, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, one last question, please.
All right. First, thank you very much, Professor Ambet, for that very wonderful lecture. It's really an honor to attend your lecture. Anyway, my question is, since we are talking about artifacts, correct me if I'm wrong, that the National Museum can only acquire artifacts through donation, correct? So my question is that what can be the future of this particular case? Because my question is that parang pag pwede mag-purchase ng artifacts ang National Museum, we can better preserve that particular artifacts, which is basically our past or our history. So yeah, that is my question. Is there any in the future possible ba na the National Museum can acquire na artifacts aside from donation but from purchase, or ano ba yung reason bakit from donation lang sila nakaka-acquire ng artifacts?
Okay, number one, the museum can acquire, but it doesn't have the budget. That's one. Number two, they are constrained by COA and government regulation. So for example, you cannot buy a painting at auction. It has to be a negotiated sale. But at auction kasi it can go very, very high, but that is what the market price actually is. So we actually have a budget, but not enough to purchase what we want. And then number two, government is very difficult in terms of disbursement. So, like, bibili ka ng painting na mahal, milyon, and then COA will say, ang liit-liit lang yan. Pag tiningnan mo yung pintura, magkano lang yung bibili kaming pintura at gawin yan. Ganyan yung utak nila. So, it needs fine-tuning. No? But it is unfortunate that we do not have the funds actually we have the funds but not enough to buy them. So there was one last.
Yes, one last question from the young woman, please.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
we will entertain her, and then you can probably approach Professor Ocampo later on as he signs his books.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Layton from ADNO JHS Blue and Gold. And my question is, when diving into historical cases, do you see it as a complicated and generally unsolvable puzzle?
Okay, we are actually limited by the sources. Some of the puzzles cannot be answered, but as I mentioned earlier, questions can be more important than the answer, because what happens there is the process of finding the answer is already an answer. You may not get the final answer, but going there is the first step, rather than people who will not even ask the question. So the point there is we should really ask. And I think that's what my Jesuit education, my Ateneo education taught me, was always to ask. The way that we were brought up was not to memorize things. And I was lucky that I had history teachers who were like that, who says, look at history and use it to make life better, to make the world a better place. But I guess not all people had the same kind of history training that I did. So the point here, again, going back to our talk, is always to ask questions and validate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Palakpakan niya to si Professor Ambeto Campo. At this point, I'd like to call on Father Ari D., Attorney June Sales, Father Tords, Father Francis Tordilla, to present to Professor Ocampo a series of what we have released as the Bicol Non-Biography Series. Ambet, ito yung BBS ng Ateneo kontra sa ano pa mang BBS. We would like to present this to you as our token of appreciation. This is actually the brainchild of Father Wilmer Tria, who is here. Where is Father Wilmer? Father Wilmer. Si Father Tindog po tabi, Father Wilmer, nga ning mabisto ka man kan banwaan nin Dios. Palakpakan ta si Father Wilmer. So, Father Tordilla. Kulang pa yan. Wala pa. It goes on and on. Father Wilmer, please join us. Father Bangcaso, Ms. Narvades, please. Mukhang may kulang na dyan, may bestseller eh. Sige. Okay. Okay. Palakpakan niya ito sa tuyang mga sadiri. So, at siya na hapon, alas 3, magkakaigwa kita kan pang-apat na lecture, digdiman sa parehong venue. I'd like to invite each and every one of you to attend the lecture of Professor Yakal. At this point, Professor Ocampo will now sign his books. May mga kopya pa po kita duman. Ang magiging proseso po, matukaw digdi si Dr. Ocampo, dangan digdi po ang agi niya to, dangan exit duman. Arog lang po kaiyan. So kung pwede tabi, magkagawa kita ki musika. Diyos marahay na aga sa gabos, as in happy lunchtime.
sisay sa Indo.